Scientific bigotry. Creationists are not the only ones who find it difficult to get a hearing from the scientific establishment. Even evolutionists, who do not conform to the majority viewpoint in evolutionary dogma at a given time, encountered this same bigotry through the so-called peer review process. One of the most distinguished modern astronomers is Nobel Prize winner Hannes Alfven, who espouses an alternative cosmology to the Big Bang. Here is his testimony. Even Nobel laureates must defer to the scientific establishment, apparently. It has given me, he says, a serious disadvantage. When I describe the phenomena according to this formalism, most referees do not understand what I say and turn down my papers. Talking about the referees that decide whether or not you should get an award, a scientific award of some kind or not. But the argument, he says, all knowledgeable people agree that, these referees say this, with the tacit addition that by not agreeing you demonstrate that you're a crank, is not a valid argument in science. If scientific issues always were decided by Gallup polls, by popularity, and not by scientific arguments, science will very soon be petrified forever. And we've gone through periods of time when that was the issue. When religious organizations produced the ideology that the earth was flat. And people came up with the idea that it was round because the telescope was invented. Copernicus. For reasons of space, these quotes have been somewhat abbreviated, but they do not represent quite fairly, if incompletely, the opinion of the respective authors. It is obvious that evolutionists agree vigorously amongst themselves, even though they present a solid front when arguing against creationists. Just possible, the combination of outside attack by creationists with the infighting among evolutionists will eventually cause the collapse of the straw house of evolution itself. After all, no one has ever seen real evolution in action, and no one knows how it works. So its foundation is very weak. One day it will be said, the winds blew and bare upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. There's some references to this. Spider there. There are all kinds of interference here. Take a look at these. These are just the sources of some of these arguments that I'm presenting now. Now we have a summary of this. The bankruptcy of uniformitarianism, upon which most of the points of view of evolution are based. Very little do they say local catastrophism or some other event other than the way we see things going today is the way it should be interpreted in the past. The present widely accepted system of uniformitarianism in historical geology, its evolutionary basis and bias, has been shown to be utterly inadequate to explain most of the important geological phenomena. Present rates and processes simply cannot account for the great bulk of the geologic data. Some form of catastrophism is clearly indicated by the past evidences of volcanism, theostrophism, glaciation, coal and oil and mineral deposits, fossilization, vast beds of sediments, and most of the other dominant features of the Earth's crust. When this fact is once recognized, it can then be seen that even the supposed evidences of great geologic age can be reinterpreted to correlate well with much more impelling evidences of violent and rapid activity and formation. But if present processes cannot be used to deduce the Earth's past history, and this fact is proved not only by the failure of geological uniformity, but even more by the impregnable laws of conservation and deterioration of energy, then the only way man can have certain knowledge of the nature of events on Earth prior to the time of the beginning of human historical records is by means of divine revelation. I say this because we look at an intelligent designer, and we look at the biblical record, which so far in my experience I've found no errors or contradictions when carefully analyzed. Then we go with the Bible until something better comes along. And this is why the Bible record of creation and the flood immediately becomes tremendously pertinent to our understanding, not only of the early history of the earth, but also of the purpose and destiny of the universe and of man. We have therefore sought to show how the outline of the Earth's history, provided by the early chapters of Genesis, as well as by the related passages from other parts of the Bible, actually provide a scientifically accurate framework within which all of the verified data of geology and geophysics fit together remarkably well. The great deluge of Noah's day is seen to account for a large portion of the sedimentary rocks of the Earth's crust, and indirectly for the glacial and other surface deposits which resulted from the change in Earth climates at the time of the flood. Lubenow says, according to the basic principles of the philosophy of science, a theory must be falsifiable if it is a legitimate scientific theory. How could the theory of evolution be falsified? Supposedly, if fossils are found that are woefully out of order from what evolution would predict, that's how we expect it to be falsified, and it should have been, but it hasn't been. Many such fossils have been found. KP271 is just one of them. However, evolutionists ignore the morphology of fossils that do not fall into the proper evolutionary time period. They wave their magic wand to change the taxon of these fossils. Thus, it is impossible to falsify the concept of human evolution. It is like trying to nail jelly to the wall. That evolutionists resort to this kind of manipulation of the evidence is a confession on their part that the fossil evidence does not conform to evolutionary theory. It also reveals that the concept of human evolution is a philosophy, not a science. It's a belief system, and not scientifically supported even. To the evolutionists, there is but one primary fact in the universe: evolution. Everything else is just data. The value of this data does not depend upon its intrinsic quality, but upon whether or not it supports evolution and its time scale. Good data is that which supports evolution, according to them. Bad data is that which does not fit evolution, and it is to be discarded. It is time to ask the paleontological community, at what point does philosophical bias in the interpretation of the human fossil material become intellectual dishonesty? The interpretation of KP271 from Canopoi justifies that question. That's the arm, a part of an arm that was too advanced to be considered a link between ape and man. It was naturally linked to humans because of the morphology of it, yet they threw it back anyway. Evolution implies a naturalistic, mechanistic origin of things. That the oldest human fossil ever found, skimpy as it is, reveals that man was virtually the same 4.5 million years ago on the evolutionist time scale. As he is today, suggests that humans appeared on the scene suddenly and without evolutionary ancestors. Prior to 4.5 million years ago, and that's the evolutionist time scale, the hominid fossil record is a virtual blank for 10 million years. This supports the idea that humans were created by a supreme being. But it's not considered, it's thrown out. We are continually told how bad it is to mix religious implications with science. We creationists don't mix them. Those implications are already there. In the face of absolute failure of evolutionary theories or models, you have to go back to an intelligent designer until something better comes along. Evolutionists act as if creationists have been trafficking in something very dark and sinister. How many young minds have we led astray by telling them that there is a creator, they say. Just for the fun of it, let's grant the evolutionist point. Let's assume that there is something very bad about telling a student that the oldest human fossil ever discovered supports special creation. As bad as that might be, I can think of something even worse. That would be to tell a student that the oldest human fossil ever discovered supports evolution. For that would be a lie if you say that. Two mutually exclusive worldviews, and only one is right. The true difference between evolution and creation is best determined by the value each places on the individual life. In evolution, the value of the individual life is practically zero. Being in a society that doesn't value life, then murder is okay, because I'm superior. Wow. In creation, the value of the individual human life is virtually infinite. It would not be stretching it too far to say that the difference between evolution and creation is the difference between 0 and infinity. Our being created in the image of God, the very thing Darwin tried to erase, makes the difference. There is a myth that the question of origins is not important. Even some Christians embrace this myth. It may be possible to study the world and life without considering origins, but it is not natural to study the world and life without considering it. God himself has decided that the question of origins is important. In reality, the question of origins has a direct bearing on our nature, our destiny, and our concept of God and our philosophy of life. It is without question one of the most profound matters an individual must face. It is the difference between 0 and infinity, the value of human life. There are only two basic philosophies or religions among mankind. One is oriented primarily with respect to God, the creator of whom and by whom and for whom all things. Man is a creature of God, among the highest of his creatures, but nevertheless utterly dependent upon and responsible to him. Man's disobedience to his creator has resulted in universal loss of fellowship with God, and this condition manifests itself in all forms of sin and in pain and death. The original status of God's creation was no death, no pain, even being reflected in the inharmonious relationships in the past of the animate and the inanimate creation. Salvation from this lost condition of man in his world has required the direct intervention of God himself in the form of man in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ, whose atoning death on the cross at Calvary was the terrible price of redemption. But with the full price of redemption and regeneration and restoration thus provided by God through Christ, through faith alone in him alone, salvation then becomes available freely to all who to be received by grace through faith, entirely apart from man's works. This, of course, is the essence of Christianity. So the Bible teaches a perfect creation, followed by a fall and subsequent deterioration, requiring the intervention of God himself in Christ to bring about redemption and salvation. On the other hand, evolution postulates a gradual progress from crude beginnings through innate forces to higher and higher levels of achievement and complexity. Well, actually, we see more devolution than evolution. For example, although man has increased his technology, he hasn't thrown away the technology each generation and started over again, inventing the wheel. So you can't take credit for everything. You have to take credit for what has been done in past ages and how slow a progress it has been made. It is not unusual for people to begin with a wrong idea of what the Bible teaches, reject that view, and then reject the entire Bible because the Bible is unscientific. This is what Darwin did. Most people today believe that Darwin disproved biblical creationism and proved evolution. The Darwinian revolution, one of the most significant revolutions of all time, is generally thought to be the establishment of the concept of evolution on a solid empirical basis. But it's not so. So the words of the Harvard biologist Ernest Mayr, the Darwinian revolution was actually a philosophical revolution from a theistic worldview to a worldview in which God was not even involved in any way. It began that way with, well, God's involved but at a distance, and now God's not even there. He doesn't exist. Darwin did not reject biblical creation. He knew nothing about it. Even though he studied for the ministry at Cambridge, it is obvious from his writings that he did not have a clue as to what the Bible actually taught regarding special creation. Darwin heavily criticized special creation and the origin of species. He claimed that the imperfections of nature demonstrated that a wise and all-powerful God could not have done such a sloppy job. He seemed oblivious to the fact that those imperfections of nature were the result of the fall, and that the world is not now the way that God originally made it. At least if you're going to represent the Bible, represent it accurately. Darwin's abysmal ignorance of what Genesis teaches is seen in that it was not until he was 52 years old, 2 years after he published The Origin, that he realized that the much ridiculed date of 4000 BC for creation was not a part of the text of Genesis, but was instead the work of Archbishop James Ussher, who lived from 1581 to 1656. Creationists no longer accept Ussher's date for creation, although it's not too far off. Darwin first rejected an unbiblical philosophical creationism, and then rejected biblical creationism as well. is a classic case of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. More on this later.